in just about every single area that one can work in, we don't have enough people to do the work. And this is true all the way from working in restaurants to working in healthcare, nursing, emergency services, the EMT response, developmental disability services, just across the spectrum. Employers are finding a hard time both getting and retaining enough people to do the work that we really need in our community. So one of the issues that I'm excited to be able to do in terms of directing funds is to help put some of the federal money that's coming into our state into some incentive and reward and training money to help people get trained and be able to make a living wage in these different really important areas so that they can serve us in the community. So that's an area that's going to be a priority for me and a priority for the legislature. I actually just got a message from somebody on another committee today that it looks like we're going to be putting $60 million in the budget for the next year into healthcare workforce related issues, which I think will hopefully really help to address being able to give Vermonters the best healthcare that they deserve, and also to retain and attract a qualified staff. Just a couple other things. We do have some propositions coming up this term, which would change our constitution here in Vermont. We have Proposition 2, which will make clear that we are no longer going to have indentured servitude or slavery in our state. We also are going to change our constitution, I expect, with Proposition 5, which is about women's reproductive freedom. So both of those will be opportunities for the legislature to pass, to make clear the intention that we want the voters to make the final decision to change our constitution on those two issues. So we will vote on it first, and then all of us will vote on that on the general ballot in November. So I think that's as much as I'm going to start with now. I'll pass it on to Mike, and I'm happy to take some more questions after each person has a chance to check in.
Oh, thank you, Michelle, and good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us on this cold Vermont day. And I'm just going to say a little bit now, and then we're going to have a little update from Thomas Huddleston of Dummerston on his work with refugee resettlement here, which is starting to happen, I understand. So as Michelle said, we started the session. We've gone through our second week now, and one of the first things we did was make sure we attended to democracy right here in Vermont. And there's no greater practice of democracy than our town meetings. It's one of those rare things in this nation in these days to have pure democracy. But the challenge is, how do we do it during COVID and keep people healthy and safe, both voters and the people who run the meetings and staff our voting. So we're going to give towns the flexibility again to do what they think is best for their town. Like I see a number of people from Westminster, and Jim, did you hold your town meeting in May this year?
I think they said it was going to be, I'm remembering someone saying April 30, but that can't be. I don't think that's a Saturday.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to be very late April, but I don't know that for certain.
So some towns are going to hold it later and outdoors. Some towns will hold it on that first Tuesday in March, and many other towns are going to go online and have informational meetings and then vote by Australian ballot. So whether it's a school budget, town budget, they'll have that information that goes out there. And unfortunately, we don't know where we'll be in another month with COVID, so we had to take those precautions. The other thing we did was we made sure that people who want to run for local offices won't have to go around and get signatures for their ballots, whether you're going to be on the select board, school board, just to make it easier to take care of that. There's a little good news on COVID. And, one of the things I've noticed is that they've been testing our waste streams to see whether COVID is prevalent and what the strain is. And right now they're starting to see signs that Omicron is peaking or fading. So let's hope it's peaking and it gets out of here soon and we can get on with somewhat normal life here, because I'm tired of it. I'm tired of Zoom, but I'm ready to resume being in community. Zoom is better than nothing, but not much better. So I'm looking forward to being able to see everybody in person. One of the good things is, on a day like today, it brings people from 3 different towns who can come together and talk and hear what's going on. There's a lot of headline issues. As Michelle just said, we're going to try and change our constitution, and come November, you are going to have the ability to vote on those 2 propositions. So we're looking forward to that happening. A lot of other things that are going to be happening. We especially, as Michelle noted, workforce is such a huge issue, from childcare to education to medical care to food service, right down the line. We have to see what we can do to help. And I'm going to use that segue. One of the ways to help is a plan that started from some people at St. Michael's Episcopal Church. I know Jeff Lewis was big with that, making the connection to the Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation, where he used to be the executive director. And they were clear that there was a humanitarian need that had to be faced with refugees coming from Afghanistan, but there could be a dual role that they could start to help address workforce issues here and bring workers that we need here. So Thomas Huddleston has been active in that. And Thomas, is this a good time for you to chat a little bit about what's been happening?
Yes, sure. No, I'm just back in the office giving you an idea of how much work there is to do. I thought I was the only one, but I've discovered that my colleagues are also here. So it is a very busy time for us, extremely busy. But I was happy to give a few minutes to share an update. So what would you like to know?
Maybe, Thomas, if you could just sort of give us the introduction to, what are we expecting in the next month and what has started? And Mike, you're muted. Merwicki, you were muted. If you want to add something, go right ahead.
Go ahead, Thomas.
All right, well, good morning, everyone. So I am Thomas Huddleston of Dummerston for the ECDC Multicultural Community Center serving Southern Vermont. We are the federal resettlement agency, the only one allowed to resettle refugees in Windham, Windsor, and Bennington County. We are resettling 100 of our Afghan allies now in January and February, and offering them the services and connections that they need to relax, to find their way again, and hopefully see their future here in Southern Vermont. We have around 12 people arriving every week. They're all coming up to the School of International Training here in Brattleboro, where they're going to be, where we interview them, where we get to know them better, where we get to orient them to Vermont, because they don't learn that they're coming here until about a day before. They've been on the military bases in the United States here for 3 to 4 months. So they're vaccinated, they're aware of life in the United States, but they haven't been allowed to do anything whatsoever, and living in pretty bad conditions. So they are coming here, and they're just really glad to be here. As much as people can, we're really welcoming volunteers who can come meet people, drive them around the beauty of this place so they can see where they are, see Vermont, see our towns, actually see what we're telling them, that this is a welcoming place. I see a question in the chat. So the ECDC was founded in 1983. It's the Ethiopian Community and Development Council. It was founded by the Ethiopian community to help resettle Ethiopian families from the civil war. And we are the only of the resettlement agencies that is refugee-led and is community-based. The others are all kind of religiously or humanitarian affiliated. So we have created this local office since just a few months ago. But as the Multicultural Community Center, we want to do two things to be community-based. We want to help build up the resources of our new Afghan neighbors so that they can be just as generous with Vermont as Vermont is being generous with them, helping them really find their home here. That's meant a lot of different things, you know, making sure that we actually are offering good English classes here for those who need it. Also making sure that they have a place to pray, because if you can't pray to your own God in a town, is that really a place that's welcome? You know, so we're really open to what our community of Afghan neighbors needs, but we also really know that refugee resettlement, particularly in a rural area, doesn't work if the community doesn't get involved, because, you know, this is not some big city where immigrants just relate to their official service providers, right? I mean, people here find their homes, they find their jobs, they find their friends because they're introduced by somebody, right? It's through the word of mouth connection. And so that's why, as the Multicultural Community Center, we really want to work with you who want to volunteer, meet our new neighbors and connect them. We have, of the 20 people who arrived so far, there are kind of two kinds of profiles. So either they were veterans, so either they really were our Afghan allies. Just yesterday, I met a man who was guarding the US Embassy in Kabul. So we really owe something to them for keeping everyone safe. And the other profile are people who had the connections to be able to get access to Kabul airport, which we knew how hard that was. So we've got people who are journalists, midwives, nurses, pharmacists, and these are police officers. These are, speaking of the workforce development issues, Michelle, I mean, these are the kinds of jobs that actually we really need in Vermont. So it's going to be some work to make sure that our institutions don't impose obstacles, you know, for those newcomers who want to go to the Community College of Vermont, for example, or need to requalify or need to get their driver's permit, right? So we're going to be connecting with you and other legislators to make sure that, you know, many of our really highly qualified new neighbors are coming in and filling all the jobs that we need them to do. And they all really need to work, because almost every family is separated. Almost everyone is separated from their spouse or some of their children, which is not normally how refugee resettlement works. It's really hard to start a new life when you're constantly worried about your family members who are in hiding from the Taliban. So it's you know, they really want to see their future here, see what could happen here for themselves, for their children, and we're going to be accompanying them through that process. So hopefully they can build their lives here with their families when they're reunited.
So, Thomas, I can share one of the things we have done already in the legislature, and we've been working on this because there's quite a refugee population in the Burlington area, is the Office of Professional Oversight is making allowances for credentials from other countries to be recognized here. So we're trying to make it easier for people who come to this country and have the skills, but everything isn't necessarily lined up the way our professional organization. So if you run into questions around that, just in general, please know that Michelle and I are here and ready to work with you. And I should say another project we've been working on here is through some folks at CASP and St. Michael's, is to purchase prayer rugs for the people who are coming here, since I believe most are Muslim, and I think the nearest mosque is down in Massachusetts. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. And we discovered that one of our newcomers this last week was an imam for the Afghan army, you know, and he needed to get out. He has a really harrowing story of how to get out, because, you know, the Taliban definitely wanted to get their hands on someone like that So yes, we've been trying to listen to what the community's needs are, and we will continue to let everyone know.
Eva,
Just a quickie. In terms of the rugs, Marzi Hermansater and I have been working on a project, and anybody that wants to donate money, and she's ordering rugs, prayer rugs now as we speak, so they will be delivered via Karen Blanchard to SIT World Learning. So it's in the process, and anybody that wants to donate some money to get more rugs, please contact me.
I saw another question in the chat, just to briefly mention. So we do have some families that are here. We'll have so of the 100 individuals coming to Southern Vermont, 60 are adults and 40 are children. So that's in total 20 or so families. But these are families that often only have 1, 2, or 3 children. And we're learning that often they had to leave behind some of their children. Often the most vulnerable it was not safe to get onto Kabul Airport. And we will have about 18 unaccompanied adult men, and 5 unaccompanied adult women. And they're not single, they're unaccompanied, because it was only safe for them to get onto Kabul Airport and not safe for their spouse or their children. So everyone is missing their core family members.
John, you have a question?
I wanted to thank you, Thomas, for the work you are doing and for all the residents of Windham County. And like the Afghan unaccompanied refugees, as you know, Thomas, there are quite a few refugees from Central America and Mexico who have been living in Windham County for several years with asylum petitions in, who've also been separated from their families and have fled from violence. And I'm wondering whether the resources of ECDC will extend to those people as well.
So yes, I mean, the first resource is that we are sharing our office with CASP. So with CASP, we are working together, and where we identify common needs, we'll be able to address them together. We're for example, with the School of International Training, are developing a language program, survival English, and some community orientation. And we've also lobbied with CASP that should be completely open to asylum seekers. So we're waiting to hear SIT's response on that. I think it's going to be yes. But also, where there are common needs, yes, we're going to be developing that programming together. And it's, at the same time, I also have to say, some of the CASP asylum seekers have been some of our most committed volunteers, because they've also know what this means for people, right? So that's also what we have to remember, is this is building up communities where also immigrants and refugees themselves are the leaders of this act of solidarity.
Cheryl?
Yeah, just a quick question. I'll echo the thanks, but because of our challenges around affordable housing, after the time at SIT is up, what's the strategy for finding places that people can afford to live?
So the strategy is really word of mouth. So we're telling people, if you know anyone who is a realtor, property owner, property manager, has a mother-in-law apartment that they never thought of renting, let us know, because refugees make great renters. They're going to be supported by our office. They do have also federal and state support, and they are really committed to work. And, knowing that we are there as the professionals to support, that helps. But having a family or friend in the community tell that to people seems to be what's working, because we do have actually, for everyone who's up at SIT, we have apartments that we're going to be moving them into over the next 2 weeks. So it's a flow, it's a tight labor market, a tight housing market. And it's kind of hard to find someone in an apartment before they're here, before you have a name. That's just inherent. But we so far are on track to, after we do our interviews with our new neighbors, to be able to either have them in their permanent housing or in homestays that would be 3 months or more. So we're not facing the kind of tightness that's up in Chittenden County because the community is really supporting us and mobilizing.
Thomas, it might be good to let Tony Elliott just jump in on this one. Tony and I serve on a volunteer team here in northern Windham County, and he's actually the housing guru looking into our community options for housing. Tony, do you have any thoughts to add on that in terms of how you've been successful at finding housing for people in RT?
We're doing pretty well, I think, and I won't take a lot of Thomas's time because I know he's busy and I can talk to the rest of the group later. But we have secured one apartment that will be available in February. We'd like to find another one earlier in a central location in downtown Bellows Falls. So I'm putting out the appeal to anyone who has any knowledge of a smaller apartment available. Atkinson Street, Burt down to Green Street, School Street, kind of that central area, because we'd like to have two refugee families near each other so that they can communicate with each other, because especially families coming in with small babies, mothers will want to talk to mothers in their native language and so on and so forth. So, please reach out to Michelle, myself, Thomas, any of us with any information you might have.
Katie, do you have a question?
Yeah. Thank you, Mike. Thomas, I blush to go from the humanitarian needs right now to a bureaucratic need. I have an email out to you, and I know you're quite busy, but I have a question about the background check that's required to be a member of the co-sponsorship teams. And, back in the day, I've gone through background checks, and more recently, for a background check, I did a little research, and it was done by some sports organization. And it was it was a for-profit business. And so I just wonder how secure my information is, and it makes me embarrassed to say, well, I'm worried about a background check, because people say, well, what have you got to hide? And I say my social security number. So anyway.
Okay, let me clarify on that. So we are required by our national office to have volunteers background checked because it's a vulnerable population, but it can be also through only the state level. And we now as ECDC have been recognized by the state of Vermont as a vulnerable populations services agency. So all I need is people's full name and date of birth, and then I can go into the database myself and check to make sure you have no Vermont criminal record. And actually that's all I see. I just see your name, Vermont criminal record, your birth date, no criminal record. I have to print that, and that's all that's required. So it's not the kind of extensive background checks that some employers do. It's just a basic check that we have to do.
Okay, so I'm on it now. Thank you.
Yeah, that's what I'm here at the office doing. I'm doing 100 background checks.
Okay.
Diana?
Thank you. And thank you, ECDC, for your amazing work. So my question is, I have a neighbor who's part of the educational language preparation team, and she was assigned a family, I guess. I don't know how many, but she was quite surprised that the couple of people who she was beginning to work with have already been moved elsewhere and have been placed elsewhere. And I just was wondering, Thomas, what the strategy is around other parts of the state, if there are maybe more fitting placements for a family based on a professional background or just housing, or going out of state to maybe where there's family in other states. If you could just tell us a little about how many of these 100 you expect to stay permanently versus perhaps find a better location?
So far, no one has left Southern Vermont. Everyone's still up here with us at SIT. But, the way that tight housing market is working in other parts of the country mean that Afghans are living in hotels, different hotels spread out all across big cities, right? Here, we actually do have the privilege of the SIT partnership that does offer housing, stable housing with a language and cultural orientation program that will be going on for the next 4 months. Our food situation has also improved up there because rather than us providing meals that were not, as much as we all tried, it's not Afghan food. And they said, okay, but actually we'll cook for ourselves. We'll use the kitchen and we weren't allowed to do that on the bases for 4 months. Can you for ourselves? So that's been a much better option. So now when we present our new Afghan neighbors with, here's the apartment that we found, what do you think? People are telling us what they think. And some are saying, oh, actually, I would like to live with this other person. Oh, actually, I think it is best if we live in this town rather than that town. And, will we have a homestay? Oh, I would rather have my privacy rather than being in someone's home. And that's fine. That's actually part of the integration process. People telling us where they'll feel best, where they'll feel safe. And as long as there's not a pressure, it is really also, it's meant to be their choice, right? We're trying to empower them to make choices about their lives. So while we can kind of gather together the resources we can and help inform people, about what's realistic, what the housing market is, what the cost of living is, people are starting to make their own decisions about where in Southern Vermont they want to live, and that's great. Actually, that's kind of what we want to happen. So thankfully, SIT is giving us that basis for us to show people all the options we have and for them to sort it out themselves and tell us when they're ready to move into the type of housing that makes sense for them.
Eva.
Yes, I'm wondering if somebody more skilled than I am would do a creative appeal to the Airbnb people around this issue. I think that, I don't have the temperament for it. And I look out and I can see within half a mile of where I sit 3 Airbnbs. And I'm wondering if someone would be skilled enough to make that a public appeal to Airbnb people to come forward during this difficult situation, this challenging situation, and maybe get a response. And I think it's possible.
Well, one of the things we're planning to do, this is a problem that precedes this right now. And what we're trying to do is differentiate between what we call mom and pop Airbnbs and what's a growing trend is what we call corporate Airbnbs. And these are people that buy housing and turn the whole thing into an Airbnb. And they're taking housing off the market. It's a lot different than somebody who has an extra room they're renting out. So we're going to address that in a different way. But you make a good point. If there's housing, we can make an appeal that this is an extraordinary time. Jamie?
That's a great question, Eva, and one that I've been wondering about. I was, when the pandemic started, was concerned about the number of folks who were starting to lose their housing locally and tried to reach out to Airbnbs in the area before people had to move out of Putney into homeless services. And I was tagged by Airbnb as a illegal user of services or whatever, because I tried to bypass their systems to call people and be like, hey, would you be considering housing someone locally? So I didn't realize that I was doing anything wrong, but it was definitely something I was trying to figure out. I've been doing anti-bias work in the region and looking at growing anti-Black and anti-Semitic organizing. And so I'm just struck by the challenge in the United States that we have with growing white supremacy organizing and this political moment that we're in, and how the economic stress of folks combined with how this connects to just resources and who gets what resources, how and when is perceived in the public. And so I'm curious about what tools are being developed to support organizations like healthcare and law enforcement and lawyers and others to deal with, their own bias, which is just a part of being human, and what tools we have available to us who are doing local community-based organizing to support Muslim neighbors. And so I'm just thinking this through about how do we start having these conversations. I've had a couple of offline conversations with folks who are concerned about anti-Muslim backlash. And so just thinking about what we can do proactively to support each other to really create healthy conversations around this and support networks.
I can let Mike or Thomas take a deeper stab at this, but one thought that comes to mind from my side is that the core team that I've been volunteering with here in the North, one of the issues that we looked into was connecting with people from Rutland who I guess it was the beginning of 2017, right around the time Trump came into office, they were expecting to have 100 Syrian and Iraqi refugees come in. And it turned out, due to some federal limitations that came from the president, they only were able to welcome 2 families. But they were able to welcome 2 families. And there was a huge backlash. The community initially was a mix of very supportive and very hostile. And there was a very large resistance. And in fact, the mayor was voted out of his seat because he was an advocate for the refugees to come, and the person who replaced him was not. But now, if we look 4 years down the road, I've been in pretty regular communication with Chris Loros, who was the mayor who advocated for them to come. And he said Rutland has really changed gears on this. They've realized that these family members that have come into Rutland have been a benefit to the community. They are contributing, they are involved, the kids are accepted, the parents are working as professionals in a variety of different areas. And there isn't resistance to refugees in Rutland anymore. Even the people that were opposed to it, it feels like overall there's a different sense. So to answer your question, Jamie, I would say one thing that we can do is we can learn from Rutland. What did they do that worked? And we can try and incorporate some of the things that work for them. We can bring those to our community to try and translate those in an effective way.
Thomas, do you want to add something to that?
Well, just to say that we have now partnerships with the schools, with law enforcement, with hospitals. And so again, if anyone has tools to share, please let us do. Please volunteer and support us, and we can find ways of plugging them in. I wanted to add on the Airbnb, just because we have investigated this option. Airbnb does have an option, a program for supporting Afghan refugees, but it's really limited to like 1 month renewable once, which is not very stable for our new neighbors who are going to be going through a lot over these first 3 months, lots of medical appointments, registering kids at school, language courses. So we're saying actually we need homestays if they're going to happen for 3 months or more. So there have actually been some Airbnb hosts who have come forward and said, all right, well then, even if that means I'm going to lose money, I'm going to volunteer and donate some months, or I'm going to convert my Airbnb into an affordable rental for a year or more. So that's a great initiative. We're going to try and pursue that. There are not that many Airbnbs that are really suitable for refugees where they really need to be walkable to public transportation. So Vermont has a lot of great it's a lot of great Airbnbs, but you really need a car for them. But if you do see any ones that are really on the mover line and you have a contact, we can reach out in that way bilaterally.
Eva, I see your hand, and Diana.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure everybody has a chance first.
Thanks.
So the people
I got to do this.
If you could hold off for just a minute, Eva, we want to make sure everybody gets a chance to have a say before other people talk a number of times. So if you could just hold on to that for a minute.
You could have talked in that amount of time anyway.
There are a number of people who haven't had a chance at all, and I want to make sure they have a chance because we're getting towards the end of our time here. So is there anybody else who hasn't spoken yet who might want to ask a question or has a statement about this or any other of the concerns that we're looking at in the legislature this year? All right, Eva.
Thomas, you just said something that belongs in the Commons. You said that some people with Airbnb have come forward. This is an opportunity to let the newspaper know, the Reformer, forget that, but the Commons, and suggest that they write an article about Airbnbs coming forward. Thomas, you're on it, right? Thank you.
Diana?
Thank you. I'm just responding to the question that Jamie put forth about what kind of preparation is happening in the community for welcoming, especially in workplaces or in the schools. What kind of anti-racism work is happening? It's a really important question, and it's one that the Community Equity Collaborative for our region has been addressing for many years. They have created 6 years ago a subcommittee that's called Diverse Workforce Development. And it was founded by the police chief at that time, the school superintendent, Curtis Reed from Vermont Partnership. And it was sponsored by the BDCC, which is working very closely with ECDC. So Alex Beck and I chair these monthly meetings. It's mainly with the largest employers in our region. And they've been studying ways that they can become more welcoming workplaces, but also that they can collaborate in recruitment of new employees from diverse backgrounds. As this whole ECDC project, welcoming of our Afghan allies, has happened, we put forth a proposal to the Vermont Community Foundation for a training program for businesses, nonprofits of all sizes, not just the largest employers. And we received the grant. So the BDCC, within the next few months, is going to sponsor a workshop series. And basically, it's looking at anti-racism, equity, and inclusion work, addressing the complex problems of your organization's policies, values, beliefs, practices as supervisors, et cetera. So I just wanted to announce that that's happening, and the BDCC will have information as part of their welcoming workplaces effort, and Alex Beck is the contact person. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. I think I see Jody with her hand up. Is that you, Jody?
Okay, yeah, it is me. And I think Paul has his hand up too. On a different subject, I would just like the legislature to really reconsider what they're doing on this equity and financing for the schools. I have seen this over and over in my lifetime where the legislature makes a decision or to think about something, then they send it to a committee, and then it goes somewhere else, and then it comes back to a committee and to the legislature, and the legislature going, I don't like this. Let's talk about something else and continue, and nothing ever gets done. So as you're a legislator and as Michelle is, I'm hoping that they will consider what the UVM study has done, which seemed a lot fairer than anything that's happened in education funding down the road in a long time. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Jody. And that is something they're considering. One of the things that has come up is that since the UVM study was done, we put Act 46 in place, and that really changed the landscape. And there's a lot of other considerations we need to take into our deliberations. And the nature of our process is deliberative, though. So, I mean, that's why it does take a lot of time. And we see the product more than we see the process when it's really more about process. So I certainly hear what you're saying, and we certainly are working with a very diverse group of people across Vermont to try and see how we get to a place that's more equitable. So stay tuned, because what you're seeing is the start of a process. So I don't think we're going to end up where we are right now. And hopefully the more we hear in that democratic process, we can get to a better place.
Well, you're going to end up with Burlington running everything again like anybody else. So Mike, it's got to be done. Thank you.
Thanks, Jody. Now, Thomas, I want to share our appreciation for the work you're doing. And I also want to thank you. Is it my understanding that you have opened up your own family to some new people?
You mean my twin daughters? Yes, indeed, they are. I asked permission of them. Could I have 2 hours this morning? And they just kind of nodded at me. So.
And how old are they?
They are going to turn 1 in February.
Oh, well, congratulations and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mike, there's a hand raised. I'm sorry, I don't know your name. PENTV is the name on there.
Yeah, I'm Paul Normando. Sorry.
Oh, there we go. Okay, sorry,
Thank you.
I didn't recognize you.
Thank you. Now that this topic has changed a little bit, I would like to ask comment on the varying interpretations of what's going on with the, or what do you call it, the reconfiguration of the state. I'm sorry, I can't think of my words right now, but
reapportionment.
I'm sorry, would you say, Mike?
Reapportionment.
Yes, the reapportionment. Thank you very much. Because there seems to be some conflict going on now between the legislature and the reapportionment committee. And from reading in what's going on in government operations. And I was curious as to how, first of all, you're in a 2-member district along with Michelle, how you two felt about it. And also wondering, it seems like you have a reapportionment committee and they did a lot of study, and then it goes to a reapportionment board, and then it goes to the legislature. And exactly what Jody was saying a little bit about education seems to be happening again. The committees seem to be injecting their personal will in terms of the decision-making process. But first, I'd like to know about your personal feelings about 2-member district versus a 1-member district. Thank you.
Michelle, why don't you start, and then I can give my perspective
Sure.
as a member of government operations.
Right. So, yeah, Mike and I won't speak for Mike. I actually feel that there are a lot of advantages to having a 2-person district. Not everybody in the state has a 2-person district. Obviously, it's a mix right now. Some places are only represented by 1 person. Some are represented by 2. The advantage that I see for the district is that you have twice as much access to knowledge, information, and people. So as a new legislator who's been in office for 1 year, I can look to the more senior person and I can get advice. And that's really helpful. It's also helpful for him because as I came on, I know people that Mike doesn't know. And so we have 2 heads are better than 1. So we can serve our community more effectively because we network with different people, we know different people, we have different knowledge and different experience. And so I believe that we are able to serve the community better by having this double representation. Some districts don't like that. That's fine for them. But the other thing I would add to this before Mike takes his turn is just that we did check in with the communities, and both Westminster and Putney, and I believe Dummerston as well, all said they prefer the two-person representation. I'm positive about Putney and Westminster, and maybe somebody else can speak to Dummerston, but people that I spoke with, there was a very strong preference to maintain and retain the two-person representation for our district. And one thing that's possible is the boundaries might change. It might be that it'll be a two-person district, but it won't be exactly the two-person district we have right now, or it might be it'll change entirely. There's an enormous amount that is possible. And I'll let Mike speak to that more because his committee will be redrafting some of those maps as we get feedback from the state and try and figure out what works.
Sure. Katie, did you want to weigh in on that?
Oh, well, what I was going to say, Michelle was saying Westminster and Putney, and she said, I don't know about Dummerston, but being a resident of Dummerston, I'd say, yeah, I like the two-person representatives for the reasons that Michelle said.
Yeah. So thank you, Katie. So Paul, I can give you a little bit of the history on reapportionment and then try and address some of what you were bringing up. We have a multi-step process in Vermont, and that's so voters get as much feedback into this as possible. And I can share 10 years ago, the initial plan also was about having all single member districts in the state. And then they heard from people around the state, and most of them said, we don't want a one size fits all. Some places it works, some places it doesn't. So they amended their plan, and we have what we have now. Now, the Legislative Apportionment Board, which is appointed members, there's no elected people by voters there. They started that process this year, and they put out a map with all single member House districts. Then they sent it out to the various BCAs, and they got feedback. Now, for instance, Dummerston said, okay, we like your map. Putney and Dummerston said, no, we want to keep things the way they are. When this got back to the Legislative Apportionment Board, they pretty much ignored what people on the ground level said, and they didn't change their map. So now the process goes to elected officials, and we're going to put the maps out again to get feedback from as many voters. We're really clear that as opposed to different states, which are gerrymandering maps in a way that does not support democracy, that we want voters to choose their districts, not to have the elected officials or non-elected officials. Now, I can tell you right now, politically, that there were people who went into this process on that board right from the start that were adamant they wanted all single member districts. The Constitution says nothing about creating only single member districts. The Constitution says quite differently that we can make one or two member districts, and they want to support existing boundaries to the extent that they can by population. And the process is going to continue as it is, that we're going to hear from people. It's going to go to elected officials to have the final word here, who we'd like to think have the best connections to people on the ground level. And we want this to be grassroots led. And I think the idea that we have a board like that of non-elected people, and we will start the process. Now, there are going to be hearings coming up. We're going to be hearing first, I think, from Windham and Bennington counties, and we will make that known. And then we're going to hear from the BCAs around again. So please contact your local BCA as to how you think this should go. And I will make sure we put the word out there for how we're going to have the hearings. So, Jim, did you have something you want to add to this?
Yeah, real quick. And I like our district and I like our representatives, but I want to disagree a little bit. I think a major problem in this country is having those decisions made by elected officials instead of objectively. I mean, it's somewhat analogous to every few years, the wildlife professionals propose a new hunting quota system to the legislature, and the legislature holds hearings, and hunters come to the hearing and say, that's terrible, leave it the way it is. And that's what we do. And in this case, I really think that the entire nation would be much better served if we had objective experts setting all of the districts without any partisan or legislative intervention at all. Because if we always go by what the public wants, we will never make progress on most things. There would not have been an American Revolution had we put it to a vote. And we'd still have slaves today. So I really think that going with an objective panel, got to be professional and they got to be good. That might be the hard part, but I kind of like their idea. I also recognize that you might want a one district system, but that's kind of like playing whack-a-mole when you look at the numbers, particularly in a small state. So that just my 2 cents. I'll shut up.
No, your point's well taken, and the nonpartisan piece comes up because this was the most partisan apportionment board that I've seen, especially when you have somebody like Rob Roper, who's the head of the Ethan Allen Institute, who's really, this is the Roper plan that was put out there. And he was adamant from the start that he wanted all single member districts. And it's hard to look at this as nonpartisan. So Tony, did you have something you wanted to say to that? Oh, I thought I saw you. This is kind of like an auction. So if you scratch your ear or do something like that, you probably might buy something. So be careful about that. So I see Swift has joined us.
I was just agreeing with Jim.
Yeah. Swift, can you be visible here?
Yes, I can. Hi.
I'm sorry you weren't here earlier because there was.
Yes, me too.
Thomas Huddleston gave a good update on Afghan refugees coming here. And some of the questions were, what can we do to welcome them? And I know you're part of the equity and inclusion group in Putney. And I guess we can talk about it later on, but is there anything that's happening? I know you're trying to reconfigure that committee. Is there anything that's happening that you might want to share with this group?
We haven't specifically, sorry, hold on. Doesn't make me, I have being asked a question right now. We haven't specifically started discussing the Afghan refugees that are coming here, but in general, we're really working on networking and building more transparency around what is going on especially in Putney, in relation to equity, assessing and getting a sense of what organizations are doing, which ones are specifically oriented with that sort of lens, and which ones might be needing more help or education on how to do that better, or creating some sort of format for having that be one of their central visions. Sorry, folks. But I do think it's something that the Equity Committee, especially in Putney, especially if we have some refugees that are moving to Putney, that we'll definitely focus on, and networking with Brattleboro on how we can use mutual aid and other ways to just really create some advocacy for that community. I think right now the Equity Committee is more focused on trying to kind of catch up and make sure that Putney policies specifically are equitable and non-discriminatory, even just something as simple as the way that our forms are written and things like that. But that's a really important thing for us to be thinking about, especially in Putney, if some refugees end up moving specifically to here. And if they move here, let's get representation.
No, thanks, Swift, and say hi to Riot there.
Yes, he's always here.
So we're almost out of time, but I want to make sure if anybody has a question or suggestion, and I know Claire Wilson's been over there and hasn't had anything to say yet. And Claire, I wonder if you have a comment or something you want a question for us?
I'm just so favorably impressed with what's happening for these refugees. It's just magnificent. And I also keep getting the message that my internet connection is unstable. So everybody keeps getting frozen. And so I miss some things.
Sorry about that. We're working on that too. So.
And the other thing I want to say is, I mean, these human stories are so important. And of course, we have to pay utmost attention. But I also think about this dear Mother Earth of ours and how can we protect her?
Indeed.
Because she needs our protection. And if she is not protected, the rest of us are not protected either.
Indeed. And we have lots to talk about that too. And I want to highlight that last session we created, over the governor's veto, the Climate Solutions Council.
Yeah.
And they released a report in December on how we want to work to reduce our carbon and what we can do to clean up the environment moving forward. Because as you said, if we don't have clean air to breathe, and we saw that last summer, how global this is when we were getting the smoke from fires that were 3,000 miles away. So there's a lot we need to do, and Vermont needs to do its part. And we can, at a future meeting like this, I think we want to emphasize what's happening at the statewide level and what we can do more locally. So thanks for bringing that up, Claire. Well, we've about gotten to our time limit here, and I want to thank everybody. And hopefully next time it won't be as cold, but we will continue to meet on Zoom for a while until we know we can safely meet in person. And I'm looking forward to that day when we can start doing our in-person meetings, have our potlucks, our meetings. But until that time, we're gonna try and stay safe. So Michelle, do you have? I see Matt Conklin has his hand up now.
Yep. Quick question, Mike. How soon should you try to log on to come on to these meetings?
We open it up about 10 minutes before.
All right.
All right. But anytime you can come, we certainly want to hear from you.
And I just had one other comment, and this went to Katie. When they did the background check, I'm on the transportation. It went to the Vermont Crime Information Center. I don't know where yours went to, but it sounded a little bit different.
Well, mine went to Florida to some sports organization. And I thought, I don't know, I'm not going to be a soccer coach at a middle school. It was something different. And I just wondered who's going to own this company next year. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. I'm going to email you to find out more about that because we need to do better than that. Michelle, do you want to close us out?
Yeah, I have one quick thought that I came up in response to a question Jamie sent me about what are we doing now, or what can we do now in terms of sort of going back to prepare for refugees and for welcoming people that are coming to our community. And it actually brought to mind a bill that I worked on with some students from the Governor's Institute, which is called Anti-Racism in Education. Mike was actually a co-sponsor for that. And it was just submitted in the last week. It's called, the number is H584. One thing that I've learned in being in the legislature is that a lot of the legislators have great ideas. We draft them into bills, they go to committees, and then they sit on the wall and nothing happens with them. And part of what happens when good legislation comes out is the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So if you hear about your legislator doing something that you approve of, that you want to have the committees look at so that they can go to the floor, please contact the legislators, not just us, but the people that are in charge of the different committees. And in this particular case, the anti-racism one, the anti-racism issue is really important. It's going to impact education all around Vermont, not just for Afghan kids, but for all kids. So not just that issue, but whatever issue it is that you care about, contact the chairs of the committees. Because one thing I have learned is that the chairs of the committees have the potential to really make the policy changes that we want to see in our state. So that's sort of an obscure thing to close on, but that was just my thought that came to mind. Contact committee chairs, because they're going to be moving forward a lot of the issues that I want to be acting on.
So,
any final thoughts, Mike, or are we all set?
well, thanks. I think it's a good point you make, and it's something I want to put out to the public, though, because we're a part-time legislature. We have an 18-week session, and that's basically because over the years, voters and taxpayers have said we only want a part-time legislature in Vermont. And if you think life is getting more complicated and bigger than a part-time legislature has time to do, then we want to hear that feedback. You know, Michelle was pointing out, we get about 1,000 bills in a session that are drafted, and we pass about 200. And basically, we have to pick and choose what we think are the most important bills that affect the people of Vermont. And we can't do them all. And not that all of them that we have to, but we have to pick and choose. And basically, in an 18-week session, we're limited to what we can do. So if there's thoughts that, and I know this is a discussion that I had with Senator Ballant, who right after her first year said, you know, we could be a full-time legislature and still not get everything done. But if you have thoughts about that, let us know. I think that's something we may need to talk about as we move deeper into the 21st century. I want to thank everybody again, and hope you all stay warm today, and hope to see you soon. And please remember, if anything comes up, if you have a question, suggestion, a problem with part of state government, we want to hear from you and see how we can help. So thank you.